All right, good morning everyone, and welcome to the fiscal year 24 Transit and Special Programs Fall Workshop. My name is Grant Sparks, and I'm the Director of Transit Planning for DRPT. We have a lot of content to cover with you today, but before we get started, I have the pleasure of introducing our new Chief of Public Transportation, Zach Trogdon. So Zach, I'll turn it over to you for some opening remarks.
Great, thank you, Grant. And as Grant said, good morning, everybody. My name is Zach Trogdon, and I was recently appointed as the Chief of Public Transportation for the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. I'd like to thank all of you for attending this informational workshop that is meant to kickstart the fiscal year 2024 grant application process. While the February 1st application deadline will begin what would be a very busy time for us at DRPT, because of the large number of applications that we anticipate, it will also be very exciting to see the efforts that you all are undertaking to improve our public transportation services. I don't have to tell you all that this year's application process is taking place during some uncertain times. As always, DRPT will be looking to fund projects to fit within the established criteria we have and that will bring the most benefit for the resources that we have available. There will be a lot of tremendous amount of information shared with you today. Our goal is that you use that to carefully consider those projects that you believe and that we may find have the greatest chance of success. Please do not hesitate to contact our staff at DRPT to clarify the information that we're providing about the criteria as we evaluate these applications. So please reach out to us if you need any clarification so you can put together the best application possible. Some of you may know that I do have a soft spot for agencies at the local and regional level because I was recently the head of an agency myself, and I know how much work it takes you all to deliver the services you do. So we are proud at DRPT to partner with you in these efforts, and I know I speak for everyone here when I say thank you for all of the important work that you're doing in your communities, your regions, and in the Commonwealth overall to provide these needed transportation services. So at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Grant and our transit planning and program staff in order to give you a head start on the application process for this year. Thank you again.
Thank you, Zach. And I will now pass it over to our lead presenters today, Tiffany and Dan.
Thank you so much to Grant and to Zach. So I have the pleasure to first kind of go over what we're going to cover in today's grants workshop. This is the agenda that we have. So of course, as we mentioned, we have a lot of content that we are covering. Next slide, please. So for some housekeeping, everyone is currently in listen only mode. We will have this slide as natural breaks for questions periodically throughout our workshop. We will also have some time at the end of our workshop for questions and answers. If you have a question, you may feel free to enter it in the chat box, or if you're feeling comfortable, you may utilize the raise hand function and Mary Olivia will unmute you to ask your question. We will be posting the recording of today's webinar that will be available on our DRPT website under application resources on the Merit webpage at the link provided. We will also make sure to send out an email with the link for after today's workshop. Next slide, please. So just to provide a quick overview about the upcoming fiscal year 24 6-year improvement program. These are just the major milestones to remind people as we go through our grant application process. So as mentioned, our applications are due February 1st. And then some other deadlines for our MPOs to receive Section 5303 funding. Those grant applications are due May 1st. And then as we are developing based off the grant applications, we finalize a draft SIP around April 2023 with a final around May 2023, as well as hosting public meetings in the spring. And then we present this to the Commonwealth Transportation Board for approval in June. Next slide, please. These two documents here, we always make sure to remind all of our potential applicants as well as existing grantees that we have to put together. The first is what we call our blue book on the left. That is our Transit and Commuter Assistance Grant Application Manual. We did do an update that was just published this fall, reflective ahead of our FY24 grant application cycle. And then we have our purple book there on the right, which is for our grant administration procedures. So for anyone who is awarded any kind of grant funding from us, this is the resource for being able to understand about grants management, reimbursements, and any other questions related to our grants. Next slide. And now I'll hand it over to Dan Sonnenklar to cover our finance update. Dan?
Good morning, everybody. I am just waiting for my camera to kick on here. There we go. All right. Thank you, Tiffany. My name is Dan Sonnenklar, and I am a statewide transit planning manager here with DRPT. I'm going to start out by giving an update from our finance department and follow that up with an overview of the merit, capital, and operating assistance programs that we oversee here. So first off, just a few reminders and points about OLGA, DRPT's online grants management system. Prior to submitting any grants within the system, please take some time to review and verify that your agency's account information is up to date and that your users all have the appropriate permissions. This can be done through the grantee information section once you sign into OLGA. And also, while you're doing that, please make sure that your OLGA master user agreements your master user is a current employee. The master user from your agency or organization is a very important assignment in OLGA. This person does control everyone else's access from within your organization. So for example, DRPT cannot reset passwords for other users within your agencies. This responsibility does fall to the master user. So please make sure that that is set up correctly. Next slide, please. The state master agreement, which was updated most recently in 2020, is necessary to have executed to receive any state funds. Executed agreements can be found in OLGA also under the contract administration section. And if you're a new applicant or you have not applied for DRPT funding in some time, please make sure that your organization has an executed agreement in place before applying for state grants this year. Next slide, please. Just a quick note here on the STIP, or the State Transportation Improvement Program. If your agency plans on using federal funds to support certain projects, it is necessary to include these in the STIP. Urban area agencies should please coordinate directly with metropolitan planning organizations, or MPOs, that operate in your area. And for areas outside of the MPO boundary, you can process additions and amendments directly with DRPT. Next slide, please. Finally, a few special instructions here for federal programs. All recipients of state-controlled federal funds, this includes FTA 5339, 5311, 5303, and 5310, must also sign and pin the most recent FTA certifications and assurances in OLGA. Now, FTA issues updates to these every year. However, the timing of their release is not consistent. So please keep an eye out for announcements of the latest version being published. The new version must be pinned to OLGA before receiving any federal funds from DRPT. In addition, there's some specific guidance here for 5311 recipients. This includes the completion of an FTA special warranty, which ensures that union information is reported accurately. So please make sure to sign and submit this as well prior to receiving those federal funds. Next slide, please. So I'll pause right here just to take any questions on any of the material that has been covered so far. I know it has not been a lot, but just we can test out our question functions here if anybody does have questions. All right, if there are none, I can move on. All right, so first starting with the Merit Capital Assistance Program. For fiscal year 2024, there have been a number of substantial changes implemented to this program. So although the process and scoring will follow a similar path to previous years, there's some important changes that in how we determine the prioritization scores for various types of projects. Next slide, please. Last month at their October meeting, the Commonwealth Transportation Board voted to approve a number of changes to the Capital Assistance Program that were recommended by the TSDAC, which is the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee. This slide gives a high-level overview of what those changes intended to do, but I will also illustrate how DRPT will operationalize those changes in the slides to come after this. So I'll just read through these really quickly. The first goal here was to update project type definitions to clarify rules and to address project cost increases. The second was to update transit capital scoring methods to allow for just-in-time delivery of replacement buses and other assets. We also updated scoring methods to include more project categories, which allows us to differentiate more between certain project types. And we added a new incentive scoring category, which will reward projects that achieve particular statewide priorities. Additionally, we updated the scoring methods for large projects to streamline the scoring process, and we provided some new incentives for transit agencies to seek federal discretionary funding. So each of these changes has been operationalized within the program, and I will try my best to call out where those changes are implemented in the coming slides. Next slide, please. So this slide provides a high-level overview of the review and scoring process that we follow every year to evaluate applicant projects. In the first step, we screen projects for eligibility, which includes making sure that projects are included in the agency TSP or TDP or the annual update letter that is provided to DRPT. We also do a review of open grants for the same or similar assets that have not been spent, and we complete a check for readiness to implement. So this is things along the lines of the completion of a study for a larger project or engineering and design for larger construction projects. The second step of our scoring process, we take those eligible projects and we filter them into 3 categories by project type. Those types are state of good repair, minor enhancements, and major expansions. Now I'll get more into that in a moment on the specific definitions of those programs. For now, after they are filtered into those 3 categories, we then score them according to the methodology that's outlined in our technical documentation, which is available online through the link provided in this presentation. So when this is published online, you will be able to click right on that. And then we rank those projects according to score. Finally, we allocate funding to those projects that meet or exceed the scoring threshold for each category. Now, we'll note here that the scoring threshold each year is dynamic and is based on the pool of applications received and the funds available in a given year. Next slide, please, when you have it all. Yeah, okay, there we go. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, projects are sorted, scored, and prioritized by project type. So the 3 project types are described here. And please note that these definitions have been updated to provide a little bit more clarity and to what project to apply for. So first, state of good repair. These are capital projects or programs to replace or rehabilitate an existing asset, which excludes major capital construction projects with a total of over $3 million in total cost. So this means that the replacement of an entire facility that will cost more than $3 million will not be considered an SGR project within our program. Within the SGR project type, there are 2 subtypes. Type 1 is the replacement or rehabilitation of a specific existing asset, such as a vehicle. And type 2 is for the purchase of items to be replaced or to replace unspecified assets as needed. This also includes groups of programs of projects or what we call special asset categories, which I will explain on the next slide. Thank you. The second project type is minor enhancements, which are capital projects and programs that add capacity or include the purchase of new assets that meet the criteria outlined here. The total project cost is $3 million or less. For expansion vehicles, this includes less than 5 vehicles or 5% of the fleet size, whichever is greater. And we also included a new point here that all projects for engineering and design of infrastructure or facilities are included and evaluated as minor enhancement projects. And finally, within the major expansion category, these are capital projects or programs to add, expand, or improve transit services or facilities with a total project cost over $3 million. For expansion vehicles, this includes projects that include more than 5 vehicles or 5% of the fleet size, and it includes all projects that include the replacement of an existing entire facility. For both the SGR and minor enhancement projects, the state will provide up to 68% of the total cost of the projects, and for major, the state participation is capped at 50%. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned a moment ago, under the State of Good Repair Type 2 category, we have included special asset categories, which are defined here. So these are projects that are normally considered SGR, but are very difficult to score based on the parameters outlined in our technical guidance. So for this reason, we take all of the special asset categories, our category projects, and we score them alongside the minor enhancement projects. And so this includes the purchase of tools to provide maintenance services, other maintenance equipment, spare parts for both vehicles and rail cars, building items and fixtures that are not part of a larger rehab project, grouped assets or programs of projects that cost less than $3 million. Now, this does not include a program of projects or a grouped request for vehicle replacements. All of those replacements and rehabs of vehicles must be applied for individually. And this also includes other financial strategies, capital finance strategies that cannot be scored based on the useful life of an asset. So this is things like capital cost of contracting and debt services on previously approved projects. Next slide, please. So these next 3 slides go into a bit more detail than we normally present here regarding the changes to the SGR and minor enhancement scoring processes. So first, within the SGR scoring, we've updated the methods to allow assets to begin receiving asset condition score points earlier in their life cycle. So this would support just-in-time delivery of new items. So the scoring schedule that's outlined here in the table below, it has a red arrow indicating where a asset begins to earn points now. So prior to this fiscal year, assets began to receive points at 95% of their estimated service life or useful life for age and mileage for vehicles. Now assets will begin to receive points at 80% of their estimated service life. So I will say, please note here that this does not mean that we're going to necessarily be able to fund the replacements of all assets that have reached 80%, because how deep we go into the program is more of a function of how much money DRPT has in a given year. But rather, this change allows us to start assigning scores earlier and to further rank replacement applications if we can go that deep into our program. Next slide, please. So the service impact score table here, which is a qualitative score based on specific characteristics of a project, has been expanded to include more categories. Now, this allows us to further differentiate between the different types of projects that are applied for. The red arrows on the left highlight new project categories and their associated default scores to the right. Within the administrative and maintenance facilities category, it has been split into 2 separate project types starting this year. This includes projects that support operations and projects that are non-operational in nature. In addition, the maintenance, equipment, and parts category has been split into 2, and this includes projects that include vehicle and vehicle support equipment, and maintenance and equipment projects for properties and facilities. And finally, a completely new category called capital finance strategies was created to account for certain financial strategies that do not fit into any of these existing categories. So this is where capital cost of contracting and debt service would fall. Next slide, please. An additional update to SGR and minor enhancement scoring is the introduction of what we are calling incentive scoring, which aims to provide greater incentives for DRPT priority projects and to reward agency accountability. Now, this replaces a series of additional points that were available to certain kinds of projects in years past. But with the incentive scores, a project can receive up to 10 points for including elements within 3 criteria areas and a final agency accountability area, which is quite different, and I'll explain all of them. So a project can earn 5 points if it includes zero emissions technology, and so this would include the procurement of vehicles or infrastructure to support zero emissions vehicles. Can also earn 5 additional points if it includes characteristics that fall into the innovation category. So this includes real-time information, automated data collection and scheduling technology, transit signal priority, safety technology, or mobile ticketing systems. And additionally, a project can earn 5 extra points if it includes characteristics that fall into the safety and comfort around customer facilities category. So this could be enhanced lighting at stops and stations, pedestrian and accessibility enhancements, or shelters and benches at those stops and stations. And so, as I mentioned, only 10 points total are available. So if a project includes elements that would address all 3 of these areas, it would be capped at 10. The final criteria, which is agency accountability, is quite different from the others. Within this criteria, an agency will receive 5 points for all capital projects applied for if they satisfy all of the requirements listed here. And so there's 4 different categories of requirements. The first is state asset management requirements. So this is where we're going to look at on-time biannual Trans Am updates within our Trans Am vehicle management system. In the state strategic planning requirements, here we'll look at the TSP and TDB documents to make sure they're up to date. Within capital planning requirements, we will look at a on-time submission of a 5-year capital budget on February 1st when it is due. And when it in the performance reporting category, we'll look at on-time reporting of performance data within OLGA throughout the fiscal year, leading up to the application. And so in order to get the 5 points for all capital projects applied for, all 4 of these need to be satisfied. Next slide, please. So the scoring methodology for major expansion projects has also been updated, and there's 2 changes worth noting. The first is that the total cost threshold to qualify as a major expansion project is now $3 million instead of $2 million as it was in the past. In addition, we have streamlined the scoring process this year to make projects more competitive across all geographic areas by eliminating these smart scale geographic area weights that were applied to these projects before. So now all factor areas within the major expansion scoring will be weighted equally no matter where the project is located. Next slide. So for projects requesting funds for bus shelters, all grantees that apply for shelter projects that will use federal funds must complete a shelter project supplemental form, which is included within OLGA and also will be available on the Merit website. This includes projects for the replacement of existing shelters, for the installation of new shelters in new locations, and for the purchase of spare shelters to be installed as needed. The form asks grantees to provide information on site and location, historic sources and associated reviews, and environmental considerations as well. The completeness of the form is assessed every year as part of the eligibility review, and applicants must identify shelter locations and provide enough information, which is outlined in the form, for DRPT to conduct an adequate review of the proposed project. Again, this is just for shelter projects that will utilize federal funds. If you do not anticipate using federal funds, you do not need to fill out a supplemental form. Next slide, please. So DRPT will consider requests for alternative propulsion vehicles. So this could be electric, hydrogen, hybrid, natural gas. But we do that based on several factors, which include those listed here. So we look at how your agency is leveraging local and federal funding for these projects. We also look at the inclusion of alternative fuel vehicles in the TDP, Transit Development Plan, or TSP, Transit Strategic Plan. or referenced in any other agency or locality plans that have been adopted. We also look for approved funding for necessary infrastructure alterations because we do not want to fund vehicles without having the proper charging and maintenance infrastructure to support them. And we also look at the clear intention of migrating a specific portion of the fleet over to our alternative fuels. Now, I will say, if your agency is interested in developing an electrification plan or studying the feasibility of it, we encourage you all to apply for a technical assistance grant to support such an effort. We also encourage applicants that are interested in alternative fuels to explore other resources available to support these projects. So this could include rebates provided by Dominion or other energy providers, and other rebate programs that are available publicly. Projects for charging infrastructure are eligible as well for capital assistance funding, and they can be applied for on their own or as part of a vehicle project. In addition, DRPT has added a small electric transit vehicle onto the state contract to support electrification efforts. So those are now available for purchase. Next slide, please. So in addition to the scoring changes that were outlined previously, the capital assistance program was also updated to include two incentives for agencies to seek federal discretionary funding. The first is that we lowered the local match requirements for those capital projects that will be supported with federal discretionary funds. So now we will allow for a lower match rate to be determined for each project. Right now, DRPT for a normal capital project that does not have federal discretionary funds, DRPT requires a minimum of 4% in local match funds. Now that minimum can be lowered on a case-by-case basis, if approved for a discretionary grant. In addition, we've created a discretionary grant reserve, which gives us the flexibility to allocate funds to a reserve account that can be used throughout the fiscal year to support projects that receive federal discretionary funding. So this just kind of speeds up the process where we can provide state matching funds for those projects. The two strategies combined are meant to make the process of applying more attractive and just easier to do. Next slide, please. So a few notes here on vehicle rehabilitations. Vehicle rebuilds, overhauls, and repowers are all eligible for merit funding. These projects have become more needed as vehicle prices have increased and delivery times have increased post-pandemic. So we've updated our internal guidance on rebuilds and overhauls, which are now outlined here. So a vehicle rebuild, here I've outlined timing for each of these and what the difference is kind of administratively for pursuing different routes. The timing of a rebuild happens towards the end of the vehicle's useful life, and it requires the extension of ESL or useful life with DRPT and FTA by 4 years and 100,000 miles. A note here is that repowers that are part of that rebuild also require that extension of ESL. If you are going after a vehicle rebuild, we ask that you provide documentation that shows the modifications that are planned. And once those modifications are complete, Trans Am needs to be updated to reflect the newest ESL of the vehicle. In addition, vehicle overhauls are eligible, and these happen earlier in a vehicle's useful life. These projects also do not require the extension of ESL with DRPT and FTA, but they can include repowers that are part of an overhaul. If a repower is implemented as part of an overhaul, it does not require the ESL extension as well. A note here on the bottom is that FTA has recently provided a waiver for 4-year vehicles, which states that these vehicles, if they go through a rebuild towards the end of their useful life, they only require a 2-year or 50,000 mile ESL or useful life extension instead of that standard 4-year extension. If you are interested in pursuing a vehicle rehab project like this and have questions, please reach out to your DRPT program manager and they will be able to provide you more guidance on this. Next slide, please. So starting in fiscal year 22, we have implemented an enhanced 5-year budget review process that many of you have been involved in. This process allows us to make more accurate assessments of the statewide transit capital needs coming down the line, and it allows us to include projects that are not funded in the current fiscal year into the future budget projections. So this slide just highlights the timeline for that review. So the 5-year capital budgets are due on February 1st with applications, but we don't get to the review process until later in the spring, after the draft SIP is released. So once that is released in early May or late April, in May, DRPT works with the transit agencies to refine those capital budgets. And in early June, we incorporate that refined capital budget into the finalized 6-year improvement plan. Next slide, please. All right, changing gears here for a moment. The operating assistance program. Next slide, please. So the Merit Operating Assistance Program provides funding for eligible operating expenses for all modes of public transportation throughout the state of Virginia. The program provides up to 30% of operating expenses determined by a performance-based allocation formula. So this is the method that we use to determine the specific allocation of operating assistance that each agency receives throughout the state. And it's based on several different service delivery factors, including sizing and performance metrics, which are outlined here below. The sizing metrics include operating costs, ridership, vehicle revenue hours, and revenue miles. And the performance metrics look at passengers per revenue hour, passengers per revenue mile, costs per revenue hour, costs per mile, and cost per passenger. Next slide, please. So a look forward to the 2024 our operating assistance program. Just an update here is that over the past couple of years, DRPT has carried forward performance data from the FY21 allocations to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19 on transit ridership and agency-wide performance metrics. But in 2024, or in FY24, we will use up-to-date sizing and performance metrics. So that includes FY22 audited operating expenses. It also includes FY19 to 22 ridership, revenue hours, and revenue miles, and FY22 reported PMT for those agencies that do report to us. Note here is that the TSDAC, the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee that helps us set policies surrounding the operating assistance program, will meet in March of 2023 to review the operating formula results and to discuss additional actions to mitigate potential swings in state operating assistance. Next slide, please. All right, I'll take a break here and take questions. I know I covered a lot in those last 15 or 20 slides, so please go ahead and raise your hands or type questions in if you have them.
Okay, it looks like we have one hand raised. Keisha, if you want to unmute yourself, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was able to unmute now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I just had a question regarding the ESL, which I think is extended service life. I saw in the vehicles, it said that an overhaul or repower does not extend the service life. Is that true for paratransit vehicles as well, or is that a different guidance on those vehicles?
Yeah, good question. So ESL stands for estimated service life. Paratransit vehicles will be treated the same way as transit vehicles. So an overhaul would not lead to the extension of the ESL or the useful life within our system or FTAs.
Okay, thank you so much.
But I will say that a overhaul needs to happen pretty early on in the useful life of a vehicle. So for a 4 or a 5 year vehicle, that would happen in the 2 to 3 year range.
Okay.
If it's at the end of the life, it would be considered a rebuild and would trigger that extension of useful life.
Okay, I see. I do hear that difference, and I think that may have been for vehicles that I'm thinking of, I think they may have coincidentally reached a very late stage in their life at the point an overhaul was being done. Thank you so much. I was trying to be clear for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And if they are 4-year vehicles with FTA, the extension would only need to be 2 years and 50,000 miles.
Okay. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Okay, Lisa, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Good morning, Lisa Guthrie with Virginia Transit Association. I've seen that the federal government, through the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, is offering funding for the transition to electric or low-no vehicles, and they would provide complimentary support for transit agencies needing assistance. There's a website, www.driveelectric.gov, and I'm wondering if there are some agencies that are looking to transition some of their fleet. Should they coordinate with their DRPT representative in figuring out a strategy on how to possibly draw down some of these funds, apply for some of these federal funds to assist in that technical transition?
Yes, thank you for that question, Lisa. Yes, absolutely. They should reach out to their program managers, or really any of us on staff, and we would be happy to help to kind of coordinate and strategize on how to access the federal money that's coming down the line for these kinds of projects. Great. Are there other questions, Mary Olivia?
I don't see any other hands raised at this time.
All right. Well, then I will hand off the reins back to Tiffany to continue us down the path towards special programs.
Thank you so much, Dan. First of all, I will apologize for my voice. I am still getting over having the flu over the past couple of weeks, so I apologize in advance. So I don't know if I actually did a proper introduction. My name is Tiffany Dubinsky with a Y. I am also a statewide transit planning manager here with DRPT, and I am the staff lead for our special programs. Next slide. Special programs, this entails roughly 3 different types of grant programs. The first is our Workforce Development Grant Program, which is our new rebrand of what was formerly our Public Transportation Intern Program, and I'll describe a little bit about some of the changes there shortly. Our Technical Assistance Program, which I'm sure a lot of our grant recipients are familiar with, and then Demonstration Project Assistance. Next slide. So starting with Workforce Development Grant Program, in the past, our Public Transportation Intern Program has been utilized by a variety of our transit agencies, but has been focused more on planning and scheduling and more of the intern focus. Instead, we wanted to make sure that this program also expanded to help address all facets within the public transportation industry. So we decided to change the title to be focused more on workforce development. So this can be both internships as well as apprenticeships in terms of any kind of careers within public transportation. We are encouraging agencies to focus this on all types of career paths. So that could be on the operations side, related to mechanics, operators, dispatchers, and operations supervisors, in addition to what I mentioned before in terms of planning and scheduling. The match rate that's associated with this program is 80% state funding and then a 20% local match. And eligible applicants, as listed there, include transit agencies, local governments, public service corporations, planning district commissions or PDCs, MPOs or metropolitan planning organizations, human service agencies that are involved in rural transit, and then commuter assistance program operators. And a list of eligible expenses, this is not the complete list. You can find information within the Blue Book, but this may include wages, fringe benefits, training. So in this case, we also are expanding out to CDL or other appropriate certifications, as well as travel. Next slide. How we evaluate and score those applications, we ask, and as part of the Workforce Development Grant Program, that there is a submission of a quarterly report to the assigned DRPT program manager. That is usually the program manager who manages the transit agency in general. We also ask that there is a written report provided at the end of it. We do note that these internships and apprenticeships are not to replace full-time positions, and they have to be focused on major deliverables or milestones that are able to be transferred from the position into other career paths if necessary. So we ask as part of the application that there is a work plan and that there is a clear point of contact in terms of supervision and work to be completed. We look forward to kind of seeing how this rebranding will expand in terms of providing better support, because we know that there's a lot of need for also other types of training out there. So if there are questions about that, please feel free to reach out to any of your DRPT contacts. Next slide. Next is technical assistance, and as we have been mentioning, this has been our grant program that focuses on supporting a variety of planning activities. So if you're doing any kind of studies, any plans, technical evaluations, we also have seen feasibility studies for major capital projects as well as innovation and technology projects. We also have had applications to help support federal requirements that include TAM, or our Transit Asset Management Planning, as well as our Public Transportation Agency Safety Plans, or PTAS. And then, of course, what we see the most applications related to are either our CAP strategic plans, or TDM plans, our transit development plans, or transit strategic plans. Basically, anything that has a study or plan, we do accept in terms of eligible activities. The match rate for this program is 50% state and 50% local match, and eligible applicants are the same in terms of transit agencies, local governments, public service corporations, PDCs, MPOs, human service agencies, and commuter assistance program operators. All that we ask related to technical assistance is that all these applications demonstrate a clear connection and benefit in terms of the public transportation field. So we're not looking to just support any type of planning activity, but has to have a public transportation focus. Next slide. This is the kind of the methodology of how we evaluate applications. I want to be very clear that when we are reviewing applications, we ask that there is a clearly defined scope of work. Depending on where you are with the planning activity, we understand there may not be a full understanding of what will be entailed in the project, but a simple outline of major work tasks or major focus and objectives, and in a timeline, it helps us to have a better understanding of where the cost estimates are related to the planning activity, as well as the scope of work and what is going to be entailed in that. So please make sure that when you are submitting applications for this, that there is a scope of work attached to that application. Besides that, we just want to make sure that there's clear justification as to why you're doing the planning activity, as well as a budget and, of course, the schedule and timeline. And that could be anywhere roughly from, we've seen from 6 months all the way up to 12 to 18, as long as you can make a justification as to why the length of time is necessary, we would be able to understand and evaluate the application accordingly. Next slide. And last is our demonstration project assistance program. This one has been definitely more utilized over the last few years since we provide some changes to what kind of projects we fund through demonstration. In general, this has been focused on supporting and incentivizing implementation of either new transit services or testing innovative and non-traditional public transportation solutions. Our main focus is that we want to provide a reduction in the financial risk that comes to trying out new transit service routes or with technology and innovation, and also helping to fill any funding gaps for projects that may not be directly suited for other available state and federal funding programs. These type of projects usually have a 12 to 18-month time frame that includes some upfront planning and simulation for the service or for the testing of the technology, as well as about a couple months after the end of the actual service to be able to pull together a lessons learned white paper document. The emphasis on the white paper document is that we want to be able to have that as a resource for other partners or agencies that may be thinking of doing something similar in the future. Match rate for this program is different from the other two that I've been talking about. So it's an 80% state, 20% local match. And then eligible applicants, it's going to be a little bit shorter because this is focused on actual operators of service. So transit agencies, local governments, sometimes PDCs and MPOs may also be operators. But we do encourage public-private partnerships as well. So if there are questions about your eligibility, please feel free to reach out. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we did some modifications a few years ago about demonstration. Historically, had been focused on the type 1 listed here, which is new service. This is focusing on areas or markets that are not currently served by public transportation, or kind of providing additional connections or expansions to areas currently served. That can be anything from your typical new fixed route service, an express route, a commuter service, or commuter route, anything of that nature. We ask that with the new service that there's a feasibility or other suitable document that outlines kind of the corridor, the route, the service timetable, stops, things of that nature. And we want to emphasize that this is not for replacing any discontinued routes that may have dropped off due to a lack of funding or low ridership rate. This is also for any kind of, that's not eligible for any kind of traditional public transit services that could be eligible through other state and federal programs. Excuse me. So moving on to type 2, innovation and technology. This one was developed in order to allow for proof of concept for any kind of new technologies. We've seen low speed automated vehicles or connected non-automated vehicles. We've seen driver assistance systems such as pedestrian collision avoidance systems, as well as an uptick in mobility as a service or microtransit services. So this is kind of the program that has been supporting a lot of those projects over the past couple of years. We want to make sure that we are supporting technology solutions that have been not tested in the market. So this is not where you would apply for CAD or AVL or other kind of tested products that have a multitude of vendors and have a variety of solutions that are already tested and vested. So we want to make sure that these projects can be both in areas that are currently served and not served by public transportation. Next slide. In general, when we're evaluating applications for demonstration project assistance, we want to make sure that the project is kind of the equivalent of shovel ready. So this project would be ready to go once the award of the contract has been issued, and that is an eligible project under demonstration. We do encourage any grantees that have a concept or an idea to make sure that if they do not have a feasibility or a plan in place, that they apply through technical assistance so that they can have the resources available to be able to define the project before applying under demonstration. And of course, we want to make sure that there is a local or regional commitment letter to not only the demonstration funding in the project, but also a commitment to see the project continue forward if proven successful through the demonstration period. Next slide. So moving on to our transit ridership incentive program. Next slide. This was introduced just last year, and this year for FY24, we will be accepting applications for regional connectivity. So that means that we are not accepting any new applications for our zero fare low income projects. For regional connectivity, as you see on the map on the slide, this is only for specific urbanized areas. As a reminder, TRIP was opened as a mid-cycle grant for the FY22 cycle for both regional connectivity projects and zero fare projects. But due to funding constraints for FY23, TRIP funding will only be available for the regional connectivity projects. So these regions, they are in accordance to Virginia code. So these are related to population threshold in terms of where the urbanized areas have been identified. And that includes, as you see here, Blacksburg, Roanoke, Lynchburg, Charlottesville, Northern Virginia, Fredericksburg, Richmond, and Hampton Roads. Next slide. These eligible project types for under TRIP under the excuse me, regional connectivity, that includes, first off on that first column there, the improvement and expansion of routes with regional significance. Some things to consider related to this is that what does the route provide access to major employers, hospitals, other modes of transportation? Does it cross jurisdictional boundaries? The second column about development and implementation of regional subsidy models. So does the region need support in creating regional linkages? How does state funding support this need? And is there any regional buy-in related to that? The creation of bus-only lanes on routes of regional significance. So this looks at whether does your region need heightened transit priority on regional routes? Does your regional transit routes currently struggle with connectivity? And then the implementation of an integrated fare collection. So does your agency have multiple fare collection avenues? Does the agency have an efficient mobile application or online platform for fare collection? And will integrated collection and in terms of accessible payment options, so whether it's cash, card, or week passes. Projects will be scored on following criteria that includes congestion mitigation and ridership, regional connectivity and collaboration, cost per passenger, and an applicant commitment. So that can be anything from local match, regional buy-in, and so forth. Some things to consider related to the program. This is going to be a multi-year funding agreement, so that's going to be up to 5 years. A local match is required, and state funding cannot exceed 80% of the total. And it is anticipated that applicants provide a funding step down in which local commitment increases and state commitment decreases as the project continues year to year. Next slide. With the application, we are going to continue what we did in the last cycle. So under Olga, you will look for, under the demonstration project assistance grant application, that will be where we are submitting all of our TRIP applications. We want to make sure that when you are submitting your application that you title the project with your locality or agency name, as well as saying literally TRIP or Transit Ridership Incentive Program, so that we can be able to identify that separate from all of the other demonstration grant applications. Please make sure to review the application guidelines before submitting an application to us. These can be found on the DRPT website as well as Olga. And then if there are any questions related to TRIP, please reach out to the statewide program manager, Lauren Magnato, with the contact information listed here. Next slide. So covering 5303, so this is our Metropolitan Transportation Planning Program. Every year we provide allocations, next slide, to our MPOs, but they must submit as part of the 5303 application to us a grant application that's through Olga. For this year, for FY24, we are accepting grant applications. They will be due May 1st. The intent is that we do not typically open the grant applications until after our normal grant application period. So you will receive it for our MPOs, you will receive notification when the grant application is available on Olga. We do plan to have a webinar in the spring. I know it has been quite some time since we've actually done a webinar about 5303 grants, as well as the grants management and administration. But in the interim, you may view our 2019 webinar that's on our DRPT YouTube page at the link provided. Some quick notes about 5303 funds. Those are allocated based off of fiscal year, and they can only be carried over in terms of remaining balances for about 1 additional year. We ask that any kind of carryover balances are outlined in the Unified Planning Work Program, or UPWP, in the fiscal year. And please, if there are any questions about 5303 funding, you can either reach out to your DRPT contacts or refer to both either the Blue Book or the Purple Book for further information. Next slide. So that should cover special programs and some of our other related grant programs, and I'll open it up to any questions from the audience.
This is Grant. Before we jump into the questions for this section, I did want to make one quick point of clarification regarding TRIP. I apologize in advance. I missed this in the review of the slide deck. I wanted to make a correction here that for the FY24 cycle, we will be accepting both regional connectivity as well as zero fare applications. The regional connectivity only piece was during our mid-cycle grant application process for FY23. So again, we will be accepting both zero fare and regional connectivity TRIP applications for the FY24 cycle.
Thank you, Grant. Mary Olivia, are there any questions from the audience?
Unless, well, so Lisa, do you have another question, or is your hand still raised from last time? I will assume that her hand is just still raised from last time, and we do not have, or maybe not.
It's okay. Lisa, if you have any additional questions, you know how to contact me if your hand is up for a question. I think we can go ahead and move forward then. So moving on, we will be, I'll provide a quick update related to our transit development plans and transit strategic plans. Next slide. So Dan mentioned earlier that the Commonwealth Transportation Board approved changes at their October board meeting. Also included in that approval were changes to our transit strategic plan guidelines. We had worked with TSDAC as well to do some modifications, and this is outlined here in the slide here. First, about modifications. So we wanted to provide clarification related to the 5-year review. As a reminder, TSPs are roughly within a 10-year planning horizon, but we did recognize that as we are finalizing the last remaining TSPs to meet the compliance deadline, that within 5 years, there may not be quite a need for a major update, which would be kind of an overhaul of the overall document. So we made some clarification to say it's a minor update that may just include updated data, and minor changes. And we understand because of the financial resources as well as the staff time related to developing these updates that a minor update would be a lot more flexible in terms of where agencies may be in their TSP development. The other change is related to the annual update process. So for many of you, you are familiar that every year we ask as part of your grant applications to submit an annual update letter. We did recognize that the letter format has some challenges in terms of timely submission as well as variances in terms of the information provided, even though we do provide a letter template. So we are going to move forward in the next fiscal year, so not this upcoming year, to look at doing a joint quarterly meeting process where we'll have both our transit planners as well as our program managers work together to be able to generate the equivalent of what the annual update letter would be. We'll provide further information about that in the next upcoming months, but you will see information within the next couple weeks where I'll provide information on the annual update, including the standard letter template. If you as a transit agency are interested in trying to test out as a pilot what our joint quarterly meeting process would look like, please feel free to reach out to your program manager or myself, and I'd be glad to be able to get the resources to you to help out and work through that workbook. The advantage is that once you go through your quarterly meeting, then we have your update, and then you would be done with your annual update requirement. The revised guidelines are available on the DRPT website. So if you have any questions about the changes or in general about TSPs, you may be able to refer to that guideline document. Next slide. And then overall, with related to our TSPs and TDPs, I mentioned that our annual update letter, those are going to be due January 13th, 2023. And as I mentioned, the update letters will be accepted in that format for this cycle, and with an option for agencies to participate in our joint quarterly meeting process. For our agencies that are required to develop a transit strategic plan, I do want to remind everyone that the deadline is June 30th, 2024. So please, if you are just starting work or you have not initiated work, I want to remind everyone that it's usually about a 1-year time frame to complete the work. And so if you are seeking any funding assistance, and that would be typically through our technical assistance grant program, please, I encourage you to apply this cycle and just understand that once the funds are awarded as of July 1st, that work needs to be done. If there are any questions or any concerns, please feel free to reach out to me or any of your DRPT contacts. Next slide. So now I'm going to hand it back over to Dan to talk about performance data.
All right, just bear with me while my camera comes back up on here. All right, here we go. All right, so performance data reporting. So these next 3 slides discuss performance data reporting that is required for all agencies receiving DRPT operating assistance. This impacts the grants that are awarded for operating support, even though it is actually an ongoing grants management effort that is required throughout the fiscal year. You all that are currently reporting have likely noticed that DRPT staff have been tracking reporting on a monthly basis starting earlier this year. And I just wanted to take a minute to let you all know that on-time reporting helps us provide accurate and up-to-date information to decision makers and the public, but it also now helps agencies, just referring back to the incentive scoring, because you all will be rewarded for on-time reporting moving forward. So next slide, please. The 2018 General Assembly passed legislation that required that CTB allocate all operating assistance funds solely on the basis of performance metrics, which I previously described. Transit grantees that wish to receive operating assistance need to submit performance data and audited operating costs to DRPT to incorporate into the formula. Data should be carefully reviewed by each agency prior to submission to DRPT. And just a note here that all agencies throughout the Commonwealth are impacted by data quality issues. So staff may reach out from time to time with questions or requested corrections on what has been reported. Next slide, please. So performance reporting is required either monthly or annually, depending on the specific data being reported. For required monthly reporting, data submissions are due on or before the last day of business of each month for the previous month's activity. So to make that a little clearer, October data is due on November 30th. November data is due on December 31st. So on a monthly basis, transit grantees must submit the 3 following data values in OLGA by mode. That includes ridership, vehicle revenue miles, and vehicle revenue hours. As of FY20, we also have implemented features that allow agencies to attach supporting documentation and to explain variances of more or less than 10% change from the previous year. The 10% change is not necessarily followed these days as a check because ridership is growing and growing rapidly in Virginia. And so we can't use that to ground truth if data reported is accurate anymore. Next slide, please. So only those agencies that report passenger miles traveled, or PMT, to the NTD, or National Transit Database, must submit fiscal year PMT by mode directly to DRPT by December 15th each year. So that's coming up in just about a month. PMT can now directly be reported in OLGA by mode, and this feature is located in the same module as the data reports for ridership hours and miles. The data should be submitted as the annual sum of PMT for each mode that the agency operates. More detailed instructions and guidance on performance data reporting is found in the Purple Book, which is available on the OLGA News and Information site, but it is also available on our DRPT website. Next slide, please. So for new service, performance data for those services funded through other federal, state, and local programs should be incorporated into the required monthly and annual data reporting of an agency at large. So ridership, hours, and miles should be included with monthly totals for those new services that are being operated. This also applies to PMT if required in the annual reporting. So a few examples of funding for projects include projects funded with the Merit Demonstration Assistance Program, the DRPT Transit Ridership Incentive Program, or TRIP, or other federal programs that are available out there that would fund new service like integrated mobility and other examples like that. So if there is new service operating, please include those figures in your monthly and annual reporting. Next slide. Oh, that is it. So I'm going to kick it back to Tiffany. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. So we wanted to kind of wrap up in terms of other ongoing initiatives, just as a reminder to some of our grantees of some other work that we're currently underway with. Next slide. So as a reminder, we launched just December last year our DRPT Open Data Portal. This was a new initiative to provide more transparency and access to some of the various data and documents that we've developed over here at DRPT. This provides open access to our various data, including a digitized 6-year improvement program, statewide and agency level performance data, and then information on our smart scale projects via the smart scale dashboard. You can find the link to the DRPT Open Data Portal at data.drpt.virginia.gov. It's also linked on the DRPT website. We are also including more information periodically, so I encourage you to check in and see what else we're providing in terms of links and data. In general, we find that this has been a very useful access point in terms of improved speed, reliability, and visibility of data. And as Dan mentioned before about performance data, we are also posting that on this platform. Next slide. I mentioned before about under technical assistance about transit asset management plans, or TAM. For our DRPT, we had just completed an update to our Group Tier 2 TAM plan on October 1st. This included 33 agencies and a combination of 5311 and small urbans. As you know, our large urbans manage their own TAM plans. And this plan is required for agencies that own, manage, or operate any FTA-funded capital assets. So the plan sets targets for vehicles and facilities, as well as provides guidance on how to meet or maintain state of good repair. The plan includes, in addition to performance targets, an asset inventory, decision support tools, and an investment prioritization. Some remaining TAM action items. So with the October 1st completion, we are asking all of our agencies to make sure they maintain an accurate asset inventory within Trans-Am. DRPT will also plan to set new TAM targets in the fiscal year 24. And then for our MPOs, you should have received any email correspondence with language about how to adopt the current targets in the TAM plan into your transportation improvement programs, as well as your constrained long-range plans. Next slide. We also have information related to our public transportation agency safety plans, or PTASP. The deadline for compliance with the bipartisan infrastructure law changes to PTASP is December 31st, so the end of this year. The requirements are based on UZA population, and that includes infectious disease language, the involvement of frontline employees in the PTASP process, and an additional frontline employee training. Agencies should be reviewing their PTASP. DRPT has also made a checklist, and webinar recordings, I think we did just host it back just a couple weeks ago, are available on the DRPT PTASP website. And the screenshot here is just a look at what that checklist entails. Next slide. We also want to make sure we promoted that effective July 2022, DRPT has a new bench of transit planning consultants. We have 5 that are currently on our bench: Michael Baker International, RK&K, WSP, AECOM, and Kimley Horn and Associates. This general planning bench is available to all DRPT grantees to help fulfill any transit planning needs. That includes a lot of what I listed under the Technical Assistance Grant Program in terms of eligible activities. Something that we want to make sure in terms of awareness is that if you are using our GPC Transit Bench, we do have a requirement for our subcontractor in terms of prompt payment requirement. Agencies that issue task orders to the GPC bench use federal funds to offset contractor costs and include subcontractors on the project are required by FTA to receive subcontractor prompt payment forms from the prime. This form is intended to certify that the prime has paid the subcontractor within 30 days of receiving payment from the administering agency. Urban agencies may use their own forms, but rural agencies must use DRPT's forms. And please feel free to reach out to your program managers if you have questions about this item. Next slide. And to kind of wrap up kind of our overall milestones for FY24. So December 1st, applications will open in Olga. We also ask as of December 15th that you submit your fiscal year 21 PMT data to DRPT. January 15th, 2023, we ask that Trans-Am asset data updates are submitted, and that includes odometer readings. January 13th is the deadline for our annual update letters related to your transit development plans and transit strategic plans. February 1st is when we close in terms of our grant applications, and all 5-year capital budgets must be submitted as well. And then we plan to present the draft 6-year improvement program in April, as well as host in conjunction with VDOT our spring public hearings within April or May. As I mentioned earlier with 5303, our May 1st is the deadline for those applications. And then we will be conducting the review of our 5-year capital budgets in May. CTB usually approves the final SIP within June, and then July 1st, fiscal year will begin, and we will be issuing our grant awards to our recipients. July 15th is the last milestone we want to highlight, which is the next update to our Trans-Am asset data. So next slide, please. So all of this information, as Dan and I have been constantly mentioning, please, guidance and assistance from DRPT are always available. So you know where to find any of your contacts, but any one of us would be glad to help you with any questions, eligibility, or just the grant application process. As we mentioned at the beginning, please utilize our resources, the Blue Book, which is our Transit and Commuter Assistance Grant Application Manual document, as well as the Purple Book, which is the Grant Administration Procedures Manual. That is found on Olga under the News and Information link. And please talk to our DRPT contacts. I don't know if we could say it enough. We are your best resources in terms of assistance with your application. And to note, in terms of leadership or the people to complain to first, you did hear from Zach Trogdon, our new Chief of Public Transportation, but we also have Chris Arabia, a manager of statewide commuter programs, Todd Horsley, who manages our Northern Virginia transit programs, Neil Sherman, who is our Director of Statewide Transit Programs for at least the next year, and then Grant Sparks, our Director of Transit Planning. So any of these contacts, in addition to all of the other staff for here at DRPT, are available for assistance in terms of this upcoming grant application period. So with that, I think that we are now going to open it up to questions and answers. So if you have a question, please feel free to either put it in the chat box or to raise your hand and we'll acknowledge you.
There are a few questions to start with. Do you have examples of best practices or projects on your website for the demonstration project assistance?
Yes, we do. So it is nested. There's two web pages that you can land on. One is related to transit technology, but we did just launch a demonstration projects website that has highlights of some of our current demonstration projects, and we do hope to start populating some of our resource papers. In addition to demonstration, we have done partnerships with the Virginia Transportation Research Council, as well as VTTI, the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute, and other academic institutions to do some methodology studies, some resource studies. So we are also going to list those papers, but on the DRPT website, we do have some example projects that's listed under, I think the webpage is called Demonstration Projects, if I remember correctly. But feel free to reach out to me if you wanted to have a more comprehensive list of some example projects for demonstration programs.
Okay, and the next question is, what date did you mention that the Trans Am must be updated?
So those are January 15th, and then I believe it's also July 15th. Those are the benchmarks. That we have a slide with that calendar that I just went over. So when you see the recording or a copy of the presentation, that'll be available to you. But the first one will be January 15th.
The next question is, could you please review the prompt payment item again?
Yes, actually, Grant, are you available to kind of expand on that a little bit more since you're a little bit more familiar with it?
Yes. So, prompt payment is a FTA requirement if anyone is using federal funds for planning activities where there is a sub-consultant that's being used. And so the general requirement is that sub-consultants must be paid by the prime consultant within 30 days of receiving the prime receiving payment. So if your agency is using the GPC transit bench that we have procured, it is your responsibility to make sure that the primes on whatever contract you're using them for have a copy of a prompt payment form, and DRPT can provide that form. We have our own template, but if your agency has your own template, that is fine as well. But the primes just need to fill out this prompt payment form to ensure that their sub-consultants are being paid within to your DRPT program manager, and we can always set up an individual call with you to work through any issues.
Thank you, Grant.
Okay, the next question is, if you are in the middle of a full TDP update with the consultants, do you still have to do a TDP update?
Great question, and I'm sorry I didn't address that. If you are currently updating your TDP plan, you do not have to submit a full letter update. All you need to do is submit either an email or letter that says that you're currently updating your TDP, and that will be accepted as your annual update.
I don't see any other questions at this time.
Okay. So with that, thank you all so much for joining us today on our webinar. As mentioned, we will be posting the webinar recording on our Merit webpage under the DRPT website. The link is listed here on this slide. But please, ahead of December 1st, if there are any questions or any kind of concerns, please feel free to reach out to any of your DRPT contacts, and we are here to help you, as we said before, develop the best grant applications possible. I look forward, at least from the special programs, to see what kind of new ideas and planning efforts that our grantees are underway and interested in doing. And I'm sure that Dan is going to be more than excited to hear about and see what everyone's coming in for Merit Capital in terms of requests. So with that, I think that we'll be able to close up. Everyone have a great rest of your week and stay safe and healthy.
Tiffany, we do have one more question if you want to
Sure.
take time to answer that. Okay.
Yes.
For the prompt payment requirement, is that only for those using federal funds?
I believe
I can
so.
take that. I can take that. The answer is yes. If you are just using local or state funds for whatever planning activity you have, then prompt payment forms are not required. But if federal funds are being used, you need to complete a prompt, or the prime needs to complete a prompt pay form.
Okay, those are all the questions.
All right. Thank you all so much.